complacency. And so we have to work together to break that, because that complacency sometimes can perpetuate the systemic racism that we see and really get us nowhere. So we are excited, hoping that this is not pandering, but there's actual push towards progress. And we stand ready and willing. And then my call, of course, to them is to be more involved and to dig deeper. We can't just demand things and shout and demand. We have to be willing to go to the table and deal.
One of the things I love about you, man, is that you active at every level, at the community level, at the government level. And I just really value and appreciate that. So thank you. I'm going to go to Larry, and then we'll end on this question with you, Melvin. Larry?
Well, I'm not sure. We've been here before. I think when we go back in history, the modern time of 68 and other movements that we've seen. So I have a question mark. I don't know whether the action is going to turn into meaningful, sustained legislation. I mean, one of the hot button topic is civilian review boards. We have over 100 civilian review boards around the country. They go back as early as 1885. The 25 major cities have civilian review boards. Many of those have the right to subpoena witness, to investigate, to make recommendations. I think what it's going to take is a collective, sustained effort, and it's going to take people who are in it for the long run, not the quick fix. We see Congress, we see legislators, local, state, everybody rushing to get something done. And I think we've got to ask the right questions. We have to understand whether we're willing to pay the price of change, the price of investment, the underbelly. Police are the secondary catchment. That's when everything has failed. So what about those other areas, such as healthcare, such as education? Those are the real systemic, important quality of life issues that are going to make America's society better.
No, Larry, I'm going to hold on one second, Melvin. I'll give you 1 second, but I'm going to push you a little bit on that. A lot of people would argue that, part of what has triggered a lot of this reaction is law enforcement's use of force in many situations around the country. What the nuance is technology. You've got, every 5-year-old has a cell phone, camera's phone. Everybody's a camera on every block. And the nuance is you're seeing these videos play out publicly. What do you say to the person out there that says law enforcement is part of the issue, that there is a culture in law enforcement that ultimately has created a tension between the Black community and its institution around policing, around the tactical efforts, measures, around the way they exist and interact in certain communities, be it different from other communities? What do you say to the person out there that's listening that says, yes, these other things, but at the heart of what is moving the conversation today is how police are treating Black people in America?
That has been a historic issue. And let's just go to the hot button that really got this started in Minneapolis. And people ask the question, how could that individual be so calm in that setting? Well, if you look at Minneapolis,
you're referring to the police officer that had his knee on the guy's neck. Okay.
Correct, Floyd. And you look at the policies that city had in place. That technique that America saw is the technique that is trained. Now, Minneapolis we're about to go to a new training session, a new regulatory implementation that would have taken that away. But that officer, and that's not an excuse, it was atrocious, it was wrong, it was unnecessary and shouldn't have happened. But that officer responded to the way he was trained, to the policy that was on the books at the time. Now, what we've got to do to that point is we've got to go to the underbelly of law enforcement and say, what are the policies? What are the policies that we want to change? Mm-hmm. If you don't want to have pepper spray, if you don't want to have mace, if you don't want to have tear gas, whatever it is, what we have to understand is how do we get to the things that are going to make material changes about law enforcement. And I go back to when Jerry Hammond was around, and we decided to take every fatal police shooting to the grand jury. We impaneled a task force. to study it. We brought it forth, and automatically it went to the grand jury. And we were one of the first communities to do that. I raised that point because we just got to understand the issues, write the question. So if you go in, you say to the command staff, here's our problem. How do we cure it, and at what price? And is the community willing to pay that price for change? It's an investment.
I'm gonna go to Melvin. If anybody else wants to kind of chime in on that, feel free to do that. Just let me know.
But all right, I do.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Jerry. Melvin, what, how you feel? Is this a new chapter in American history? Is this a new day in front of us?
I'd like to think it is. I like Larry, I have a question mark there as well, but I'd like to think it is. The fact that it is being driven by so many young people who seem to have a different perspective on the world and on life than some of us older folks do. They seem much more connected to each other. They seem much quicker to defend each other. It feels different, but I think there's some other contributing factors to that. You've got our COVID situation we're dealing with, so people have time to go out and do those kinds of things. We have our economic situation that we're recovering from. People are frustrated. We have our national strife on the political spectrum. People are angry. So I think all these things have led to a convergence that feels like a movement. I hope it is, but we certainly have to have some sustained effort to make sure we can continue that momentum and keep people engaged, and ultimately go to the ballot box in November to advocate for your positions and hold people accountable.
Man, I think that's key, and and I'm included. That's right. You know, that at the end of the day, we are held accountable at the ballot box, and at the end of the day, the power rests within the masses, and so. You can your voice. I get all kinds of calls of folks wanting to be on this panel, and I'm saying that you on the most important panel of all, the voting panel. So, Jerry, I know you had a comment you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that what Attorney James is talking about is very important. But and some of the young folks that I've been talking to, it's bigger than just the police piece. It is this overall oppression that's been put on Black folks and folks of color, that the police happen to be, in some cases, the first line to bring about that oppression. And that's been historical all the way back to when the Ku Klux Klan were the police officers are. That has been occurring in our community for a long time. So there is those other deficiencies or the disparities in terms of the prison system. You know, we still have more people in prison than anybody else. Unemployment. We spend the least amount of money on our children when it comes to education. And, you know, we were back Brown versus the Board of Education. That was like in '54 when we switched away from that separate but equal. And it said with all deliberate speed, and we over 60 years later, and we still don't have that equality that's involved. So when these young folks are talking, they're talking about more than just this action. They're getting immediate response, but they're talking about compensatory. Some people would say reparation. So in terms of the school district, that more money is put into the public school district. People who are incarcerated for nonviolent crimes, for substance abuse, that they be released. And you guys know, remember, it used to be a thing, Nick and Kevin, now when I talked about helping the young people and the young people doing everything, I'm talking about you guys. Now, you guys may not remember when we were running. I'm talking you in that group too. Y'all making it happen, I'm telling you. But when you guys may not remember when we were running numbers. And that was something that occurred in the African-American community, and then organized crime got involved, and then the state took over. So can you imagine you being a number runner, getting busted, sitting in prison, and you watching up on TV when the state running the lottery for what you were doing some time ago that was illegal because you didn't pay taxes?
Kind of sounds like medical marijuana. It almost sounds like medical marijuana.
Yeah, same thing. So these young people with all this information and technology, they getting the information and they knowing what happened way back in. So you see Detroit just got rid of the Statue of Columbus. They want to get rid of these others. They saying the truth and they're keeping it real. And they saying, now you older folks taught us some things when we were younger that we listened to because we loved you. But we found out since then that it's not that true. And they busy making a change and they want immediate action. And I see it in them and I think it's great. I don't have a question mark. I got a big exclamation mark and I feel real good about what's happening, and it is happening.
Yeah, let me respond to
Larry,
Larry on that. We will find out very soon how sustained this movement is when the election occurs in November. That is a very clear, very simple, very measurable, tangible item that we will see. So if we, what we've known by history, the Black vote and getting the right to vote changed a lot. We've seen the color of elected officials change in America. We saw what didn't happen in 16 when the Black vote didn't turn out. So I hope this excitement, this activity turns into voter registration and votes. And if it doesn't, we're right back in the cycle.
Yeah.
I know some other folks Nick, you want to chime in, but let me just give a quick shout out to my main man, Al Edmondson, who's watching. Al, I want you to come on next. I want to get you on here because I know you definitely got your ear to the ground. But we also have some, the Franklin County Board of Commissioners is watching. So my colleagues and staff here, appreciate you. Former Superintendent Gene Harris is on. I was just having a conversation, Gene, about you last weekend. And so with somebody from Cleveland. And so good to see that you're watching. Also retired police officer Patty Hobson, second week. Patty's been on. I appreciate you joining us and listening in. Hopefully you'll send in a question. And then certainly, I guess it says Nick's fan group, but it also says AKA Columbus Urban League Young Professionals. So I don't know if he got them to call in and watch or what.
I'm their fan.
I know you, Nick. You had something that you wanted to say.
Yeah. So I just want to make it clear, this is all about it being sustained, and we can't lose sight of the moment. All right, and right now that's all it is a moment. But the difference between a moment and a movement is sacrifice. Exactly. So we have to be willing to ask ourselves, what are we going to sacrifice? Because we all have a role to play, whether that is you protesting in the streets, or whether that is you in your boardroom, whether that's at the ballot box, whether that's even at your cubicle. We all have a role to play. And you have to, at this moment, say, what am I willing to sacrifice so that we can sustain this movement? Because right now it is just a moment. And I want to be clear that we need to be intentional about what we're asking for and be focused on it. Let's not get distracted by sideshows, right? And it's real easy to do that. We have to stay laser focused and we have to stay involved.
So I'm glad you said that, and we're gonna keep this going. I got questions that are starting to pour in, so I want to make sure I get to our viewers' questions. But let me just go on something you touched on, and that's substantive things that really matter and make a difference in this. And there is a movement right now to take down Christopher Columbus statues everywhere, and there was a huge debate in the legislature last week on whether or not county fairs should be allowed to have Confederate flags up and that kind of thing. Are these things substantive things? Are these things, do they matter in this conversation, or is that just smoke around what is really the fire over here? Melvin, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think those things are symptoms of the issue. I think historically let's be real. Historically, we haven't told the truth about what history really means and what it really is. And so when we get to the point of being real about our history and being authentic in how we present it, then we can actually get an understanding of what that meant then and how it can impact us now. The whole notion of Columbus, okay, we held him up as this discoverer of America and a hero. No, none of that's true. Right. So why aren't we wrestling with the honest, brutal facts in reference to symbols of that nature? People will argue for the Confederate flag. We know that they were in insurrection against the country. They lost the war. Why are we still having those symbols that are out there? If you go to Germany, you don't see Nazi symbols all over the country. That doesn't happen. So we have to be very honest about our history and understand that systemically throughout history, our entities, our governmental entities and things of that nature have been very complicit in how these structures have been set up. We've got to tear those things down.
Right. And to the next person who wants to answer this, I mean, keep in mind too, a lot of people feel like that's free speech. If you're taking down, if I want to have a Confederate flag at the fair on my booth, that's my way of voicing my opinion, my voice, and I'm allowed to do that. Jerry, do you think that these matter in terms of the big?
Yes, I do, because I can understand the free speech portion of it, but just think, if you Native American, we have been calling Native Americans Indians for over 500 years because Christopher Columbus was lost when he landed on the shore here. And so those symbols there, so we didn't challenge that all these years saying Indians when they, so, and then not only did that, we oppressed them, took the land, put on reservation. It's just a whole lot of other things that came in there. And things start off in the mind first. Mm-hmm. And then it goes to activity. And then when that activity is planned to suppress and oppress a bunch of people for capitalistic reasons, that's what we know. We know it was all about the money right from the beginning. And that's when we were here. That's the reason it took land. And I don't call it slavery. We were held prisoners of capitalism. We were held prisoners. It was free labor all that time. And we talking about addressing that now. And I think these young folks are saying, let's address this immediately and do it fast. Now, I hear us saying that this might be just a moment, but New York made major changes. We made changes here in Columbus. Minneapolis made changes. Changes have already occurred from the movement that these folks have already put out there 3-4 weeks ago. So while we might want to say it's a moment, I think that it's the beginning. It's a movement for me. And I see it. I feel it. I see it. It's all over the world. I have never seen it like this. I've never seen a response so strong and such a short amount of time as it is right now. And I see people speaking up and taking people to task. And I don't even know the folks, but I think, as I said at the beginning, there's room for all of us to contribute. Nick said it so well. All of us need to get up on the wall and get busy and contribute. Yeah, but Kevin, stay out of the way of the young folks because they're making it happen. Yeah. Let them do their thing.
I raised the point, Larry. So do you think that these symbols of history, whichever side they're on, do you think these are meaningful things and the movement to remove these things from society? The Confederate flag, Christopher Columbus.
I think the difference.
Even some people say Ben Franklin.
I think the difference between a First Amendment right is an individual First Amendment right to carry the Confederate flag or do that. But government sanctioned, subsidized public dollars going into these sort of symbols, that's a no-no. And whether each of us personally might have a different opinion about it, as the superintendent said, you would not see a Nazi flag in Germany or any of the sympathizers to Hitler. So I think in America, what we need to understand is that same sentiment. You have a First Amendment right as a person, but for the government to sanction, to support, to fund, to care, to maintain, that's where the line gets drawn. And I think because of the history, those statues and monuments were created after the Civil War for white supremacy to do that. So you got to understand that history. I want to just push back on Jerry's thing about change. We haven't seen change yet. It is too early to tell. So will we invest the dollars in healthcare? Will we invest the dollars in poverty? Will we invest the dollars in police reform? Mm-hmm. So I don't want to get too excited because I think the issues are deep and they didn't get here yesterday. And with the government dollars where they are as a result of the pandemic, it's going to take some hard, painful investment to cure these ills.
Yeah, before I'm gonna turn to you, Nick, on this. But let me give a shout out to our Jobs and Family Services Director, Joy Bivens, who's tuned in. Appreciate you watching. Keena Smith, our Deputy Administrator from Franklin County, and then Tom Katzenmeyer, our Greater Arts Council. And I'm so grateful that you're tuning in, Tom, because this is really a conversation about society and about the conversation around race, and it involves everybody. These are Black men on here today, but it's a conversation for everybody. Nick, let me go to you, and then Melvin, you look like you got something to say, so I'll let you bring it home.
Yeah, and so when I'm saying let's not lose focus, right? The statues, and those are symbolic symbols of the pain, right, that have to come down. But when I say don't lose focus, that means that we don't stop there, right? That means that we have to keep going. Those are just short-term fixes to remove the symbolic or the physical manifestation, if you will, of the symbolic nature of the pain of the past and systemic racism. But that is not systemic racism, right? We can't stop at the statue. We have to dig deeper, and we have to be more sustained, and we have to challenge, as Larry said, and put our money where our mouth is. We have to sit at those tables, see where the investment is going, and make that sustained change. So that's what I mean by let's not lose sight of the end goal.
Okay. All right, Melvin, bring us home on that question.
Yeah, I wanted to add another layer on the symbols. The reason it is important that we address those is because those are complete contributors to the entire idea of cultural conditioning that we've all been subjected to over the years, which we know has been made, it's made us believe that white is superior and black is inferior, which leads to the whole notion of undervaluing, underestimating, and marginalizing black people. Those symbols are substantive to driving those beliefs. That's why they need to be removed. That's why they need to be gone. And that's why we have to have a real, honest conversation about what historical context really means.
Man, I think you hit the nail on the head on that. And that really is a good segue into this question that just came in online. And it's directed at you, Larry. But I think this would be good. So the order I want to go is Larry to Jerry to Melvin to Nick. And if you pass on the question, that's fine too. But it's really a question about psychology of police officers. And so I'm going to start with you, Larry, because it's directed to you. The question is, it says, do police officer candidates need to go any psychological testing before they get into the academy? And then, if so, should they get testing ongoing while they're on the force?
Yes. When we look at the requirements for a police officer, the requirements sometimes of a hairstylist may be more in depth and greater requirements in the repetitive training. One of the things, having been safety director, you would love to see some sort of emotional training, self-awareness, sensitivity we've talked about, cultural competence, and that has to be repeated every so often.
It currently doesn't happen. That's not currently
it doesn't happen. Okay. And so with the answer to the question is absolutely.
On both sides. Okay. Jerry, any additional?
Yes. I think that there does need to be that psychological training that occurs ahead of time and not just for a short amount of time, like a session that they go through. It's ongoing because of the role that they play. It's not many positions where you can arrest people. You have the authority to arrest people, and you could do it by force or taking someone's life or anything. So it's a critical job, and I think we need to do a much better job. If you go for an FBI agency, if you're going for a federal agency, they're going to do background check all the way back as far as you go. And the police departments need to do more. There's a culture there that I see where, for instance, a quick example, because I know about time, something happens in the African-American community. We typically will police inside the African-American communities, where in the suburban communities, we police the perimeters, what's coming in and what's going out for prevention. But inside our community, it's more addressing the issues, looking for issues. If you're looking for those issues, you're going to find them because they go on everywhere. But this is what bothers me. If a young African-American male, which bothers me, kills another African-American male, a lot of times we hear there weren't any witnesses and we move forward. And that same person that perpetrator is still in our community. But now if a police officer gets shot, we find out right away, police officers come from everywhere to make sure that whoever that perpetrator is apprehended. And to me, that sends a message to the community, another symbol about the value of a person's life. And then on top of that one, and so let me say this right quick, because I know I may hear this, they'll say, well, people don't want to testify or snitch on them. Well, the young folks see the same thing the police department does. The police department have what we call the blue code. And so they don't tell on each other. If something occurs, they go right to the union. The union is set up to protect them. And so when I say I see movement going on, these young folks, older folks, we would say reallocate the funds. The younger folks are saying defund the police, but they're talking about reallocating the funds, but they know if they defund the police, they get rid of the union. If you do the straight allocation, you don't necessarily get rid of the union. So I think they're thinking a lot more than what we're talking about. And they really are dealing with that psychology of the police department. And I still say we can't forget that they've been around for centuries, oppressing us as a people. And initially that was their intent. And I don't want to let that go.
I'm sorry, Kevin. The question was, before we lose sight of it, is there additional training, including psychological training, that is needed and necessary? And the question to that is absolutely yes. Who makes that decision? The mayor, the safety director, the city council. It is not the union. So those issues, if management makes the decision that those are important and management makes the decision to put the dollars there, it will happen.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because let's stay on that a second, because but part of the challenge is, and I believe in organized labor. I believe that is a very important part of the American workforce in the protections, and it prevents the kind of abuse that often occurs from employers. But the psychological tests, are those things, Larry, that have to be negotiated in the CBA? So can the mayor, when there's a CBA that's up, a collective bargaining agreement, when that's up, don't the two sides have to sort of agree to things, or it goes to a third party that sort of gives you a halfway in between?
I think, I have to smile, having been assistant city attorney, having been safety director, now GC, the admissions to the police department, those individuals are not a part of the union. What you're talking about is disciplinary issues, as opposed to those ongoing educational tools, whether it's psychological or what have you. You don't have any adverse effect on having repetitive, sustained educational, cultural awareness, emotional IQ in a contract. Those are completely different. What's amazing to me about this discussion is I'm asking myself, is the union that smart, that powerful, that devious that they can control a mayor, a city council, a budget process? No. If the director or the mayor or city council says, these are the things we want to put in place, you got to commit the dollars to them.
Hey Larry.
Okay, I'll push back.
Hold on, Jerry. Hold on, Jerry. One thing. I've been a part of a lot of collective bargaining agreements over the years. And I have to say, there's a part of me that agrees with Larry, because, when we negotiate, I feel that mayors and commissioners and governors, when we do the collective bargaining agreements, we have, at some point, we got to take control. Often we let the lawyers come in and they start working together and say, well, here was the last CBA, and we start there. And then I say, well, why do we have to start there? Why can't we? Now we want to do this. And even the third parties sort of come in that advise us will always say, well, but you want to always kind of work in this sort of meet and halfway point. But I think where I think elected officials, where we can take a stand, is to be really hardcore is the only word I can think of right now, but hardcore when it comes to developing that CBA, when these elements are a part of the conversation. And so, Jerry, I want to come back to you. I promise I am, but I want to give Nick
no problem.
Talk, and I want to give Melvin, and then we'll end with you on this side of things. Nick.
So I guess the question now is to the CBA and that, or are we still talking?
No, we're still talking about should there be psychological tests on the front end, and should there be psychological tests ongoing? And then it's kind of morphed into the broader conversation. So feel free to talk about how you.
So absolutely, there should be psychological tests on the front end as well as ongoing, right? And for two reasons. One, officers need to be held to a higher standard, because as Jerry said, they have the right to take life. They have the right to take your rights. So they should be held to a higher standard for the public's trust, but also for their protection. They should be getting that psychological evaluations ongoing, because that is a stressful job of what they go through. So for the community safety as well as for the officers' health, it should be a no-brainer and it should go on. But I want to be clear here too, that when we talk about this thing of just throwing money at it, when you get almost 70% of the city budget, I don't know how much more money we're supposed to give to this. And so we have to figure out what is really happening at that table, what is really happening with those lawyers. If there is not an agreement, then it goes to arbitration or goes to some closed room door where lawyers hash it out. And then what, are we just stuck with it? I don't know what the answer is, but we do have to, there has to be some responsibility on both sides of this. and elected officials have to come to the table stronger. But also right now in this moment, as Jerry said, this is where the movement happens, is we as people have to get behind our politicians to give them the air cover and give them the pressure on the ground for the FOP to come to the table and for the police to say, yes, we believe that policing should go this way, because there's so many good officers that I talk to who feel that changes need to be made.
Man, great points. And I just want to reiterate to the watching and listening audience that Larry represents the FOP. So he's given real perspective as part of that negotiation element. And I think there's something to be said that if the elected officials are not stepping up and doing their part and being more strong about what we expect and want, I think that's real. And I've been a part of them enough to know that that it could be better. We could be better. So Melvin, we're going to.
Officials have the power. They have the people pressure there to bring to the table. That's, I think, the difference in this case from when you were at that table, Kevin.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. Okay, Melvin, we'll go to you, and then I'll end with you, Jerry, to wrap this question.
Tons of great points being made, and I concur with all of them. Certainly, there should be additional training of that nature that would allow both for their protection and for those of the citizens. Alluding back to Larry's point about beauticians and barbers, they go through rigorous training and they have to get recertified. Our teachers in our district have to go through rigorous training and get recertified on a regular basis. They do professional development every year, ongoing. So why isn't that the same in a situation where someone has the ability to take life based on a reaction or a mood or an emotion? Absolutely, that training should take place.
Okay. Right. Yeah, I know you've been waiting on the edge of your seat to respond.
Yeah, because I want to say this. I understand about the testing and all, but I still believe it's the psychology of this culture in the police departments prevalent throughout the United States. And what we're experiencing, not just here in Columbus, but all throughout the United States, that has to be addressed. If we don't address that psychology and just ignore that, that's an issue. Now, where I push back with you on there, Attorney James, on there, is that I understand that there's a union and there are the politicians there that makes those decisions and those lay persons who are working and makes those decisions. But everybody's supposed to be working for the people. And what I see is the people coming in on the tail end of it, getting the short end of it, because if you do something to that individual citizen, then you're talking about immunity, qualified or whatever that immunity is that they can receive that is supported by the Supreme Court of the United States of America. That's against the people that we are supposed to be protecting and serving. That's the issue that I have with the whole setup there, that we're talking about two people. If it's Commissioner Boyce, you work for the people, right, Commissioner?
Of course.
The department work for the people. Here's the union who does not work for the people, having quite a bit of an influence on these other two parties, and those dollars are coming from the taxpayers and the businesses that pay taxes. So I can't, for the life of me, see why a union would have the kind of power. You said they don't have that power, but I hear that they do. I know that when something that does occur, that officer doesn't have to give over the body cams or do any of that thing. They go to the union first. So to me, that's power. That's juice.
Man, I love
Kevin. You'll remember when Kevin when Kevin put the legislation forth on the body-worn camera, and we worked on that together. And Kevin knows that we at the National FOP came up with a model policy that ended up being utilized around the country in many jurisdictions. I think that it's a bit difficult to say that law enforcement as a whole is the culprit of all these things bad. I know, working with officers as safety director, I've prosecuted cops, administrated cops, disciplined cops, and now general counsel. And I can tell you, it is a tough fight to implement change. But Kevin sat in with a meeting with me the other day, talking to one of the leaders in the union, who said this: I was wrong about body cameras. Now my officers don't want to go any place without body cameras. We will come up with our model civilian review board. What I'm saying to the public is, look at this. When you go to the bargaining table and money is the object, What management does is it concedes management rights. The superintendent knows that in negotiating with teachers. And when you give up management rights in lieu of dollars, you're giving up something. And as a labor union, and you come back and you say, I want something back, that's bargain for trade. Cops want the same thing everyone else wants. They want a better operation. They want to be held accountable. They want it to be consistent, and they want it to be fair. If you have an officer that has had 17 complaints, as a superintendent, if he has a teacher that is, that he's going to regularly maintain, he's going to have a problem in the litigation because he's maintained a teacher that's done bad things. And then when he tries to fire that teacher because discipline hasn't been implemented, it's a lot tougher. That's universal, not just with cops. But what I'm saying to you, I think if you get in this maze, you've got to look at what the real issues are in the substantive change. I understand, Nick, that the major portion goes to law enforcement, and I think there's a reallocation. Cops don't want to respond to barking dogs. They don't want to respond to property dispute. Take that away. Take that money away. Let's invest it in that psychological training. Let's make that officer better. Let's hold them accountable. And I think you're going to see.
And see, Larry, to that point, that when I hear defund the police, the what I would describe as the deep dive on that are the things you just talked about. Looking at where we can civilianize certain aspects of policing that we do today, and really pull some of those dollars out, because what Nick is talking about is real, and that's not just at the city of Columbus, by the way. That is a national trend. The costs have just become to dominate municipalities. But we got 15 minutes, guys, and I got questions coming in. We got to move on, and I know this is great, and we're going to pick this up next week. Let me just do a quick shout out to Charity Martin King out there watching, one of our strong community activists and leaders out there. Sharon Gordon with Urban Trend Centers. Good to see you watching, Sharon. Dontavius Jarrell's candidate for the 25th House District. Good to see you watching. Hope you're getting some legislative ideas here. And then finally, my man Charles Traylor from WVKO Radio, who's just been a long time champion and advocate in this exact area. We'll have to have you on sometimes, Charles. Good to see you watching. Now, let me just, Larry, you brought up education. And we've got the superintendent of Reynoldsburg schools. And Reynoldsburg is not the city of Columbus when it comes to schools, but Reynoldsburg is probably a microcosm of Ohio. It looks, it's a good balance of working class, working families that are there. And it's probably a good mix in terms of student population, in terms of race and whatnot. But let's shift a little bit to COVID-19. 2020 has been the wash year. We haven't had school, we haven't had sports, we haven't had anything. We all been locked up in our homes for like the last 6 months. And I don't know about y'all, but I've gained like 10 pounds down here. I'm trying to work on now. Everybody can't be slim and trim like you, Nick. Everybody can't look all muscular and slim and trim like you.
That's just the way. That's just the neck up.
The way you got the camera molded up there, right? But I'm gonna turn my other question out to you, Melvin. Talk about how COVID-19 has impacted the education system. How are you looking at school this fall? What do you see as some of the dynamics, of all this racial tensions playing out over the last month or so? How's that going to play out once the school year starts?
There's so many dynamics at play, some of which we don't know yet, because we're waiting. Most schools and school districts are waiting for guidance from the governor's office, from the Department of Education, and from the health departments. So we'll be working in concert with them to figure out what that's going to be. In district, however, we've been planning for as many as 3 to 4 different scenarios and just waiting to find out what those parameters are going to be, and we'll activate whichever one fits. And we're trying to plan for that. We know also many of our kids are going to have regressed because we get summer regression anyway. Now we're going to have COVID regression and summer regression all combined in one. So we know we're going to have to do some triage in that regard to make sure our kids are still continuing to excel and move forward. It's making us remake education and rethink about what it should look like and how it should be designed. I think it's identified some really stark inequities within our system and how we should go about addressing those. The whole notion of Wi-Fi access is a huge issue. For me, that should be a utility, just like gas, water, sewer. Everybody should have access to it.
But Superintendent, I could just add in, what are you all going to do in Reynoldsburg to deal with racism? What are you going to do anything to change as we come out of this COVID-19 environment? And there's an opportunity for a new platform. What are you going to do about racism?
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned that. We just had that conversation last night in our board meeting. So our board is fully on board with making sure we're looking at our policies, we're looking at our practices and what they look like in implementation, and we look at our curriculum, that we take that apart and see what pieces are we missing? Who are we not recognizing? Who does not see themselves? I've always believed that when kids come to school, they can be anything they want to be, but if they don't see it, they can't be it. So we've got to give them those examples in front of them, so they have an opportunity to aspire to greater heights. Coming through school, I come from a tough background, single parent household, no money, those types of things. But I went to school and I had some role models that looked like me. They gave me an opportunity to see that's what I want to be. I want to follow that person's path. Man, I can't need that.
Yeah, that's outstanding. I mean, one idea for you, I mentioned this on the panel I was on earlier, racial equity training as a course for kids in high school. I did it, all the commissioners did it, and I went thinking, oh man, this is going to be, I already know all this stuff, and it was outstanding. It was absolutely outstanding. I was riveted for those 2 days. Let me go to Nick, and then I'll go to Larry, and then you, Jerry, on the same question. And we got, just so you know, we got about 10 minutes, and I want to give you guys a chance to wrap up with final thoughts. I see Nathaniel Jordan has joined us from the Kappa Foundation, and Erica Crawley, state representative, one of my favorite state representatives, has joined us watching. I know she'll take some legislative ideas out of this. Nick?
Yeah, I mean, really real quick on the education piece, I think that when you talk about combating racism and combating poverty, education is the front line of that, right? When we think about just the thought process and how kids are formed culturally, that happens usually at the school level, right? Even at elementary school and throughout. And Commissioner Boyce, you bring up a really good point about that type of training happening in the school. I would go further and say that the standard in the curriculum needs to be a common anthropology class, because anthropology teaches you that we all came from Africa. We all are the same people. White people are just white because they migrated out of Africa and they don't have as much direct access to sunlight. Not necessarily different people. We're all human beings. And so I think if we ingrain that nature into our students early, because racism is a learned behavior, it's not a natural behavior. So we have an opportunity in our schools to change the curriculum, to not just treat our kids as robots and teach them mathematics and get an output out of them, but to teach them to be true human beings, and give some moral fiber back into our curriculum that has been missing for decades.
Sure, I got to cut you off. I'm going to go to Larry and then Jerry.
I think in every aspect of our society, whether we're talking about policing, whether we're talking about education, whether we're talking about healthcare, I think it's time we pull back the curtain, take a step back, and look at all our existing policies and how we have done what we've done in the past, and say, how can we do it better? What does it take to do better? And we are going to have to let our disagreements take us to a better place. Because people disagree doesn't mean they're your enemies. And we've got to understand that they're based on their experience, it's based on their training. And that, if we can move, I've enjoyed our time, Kevin. I spent more time with you as a public official than probably anyone since Jerry Hammond. And I just know what it means when we get in that room, we disagree, we wrestle with the painful decisions, and we come out and we said, I may not agree with you on that, but this is a good point. Let's move towards that.
Yeah, man, well said. Well said. Jerry?
Yeah, I would just say ditto to what everyone else is saying. I just think that we ought to make sure that we put more resources in the public school districts, not just here in Columbus, but just around the country. I do believe that.
That's spot on. That's spot on.
The only other thing I would add, like I said, Nate, I like what you added. I would just add a piece on family development, parenting, because that's one of the most crucial jobs that we have. I put it right above teaching, and we do not prepare our young folks for that are going through that system, and they're, become mothers and fathers while they're in school. Man, and I think we'd help out.
You're hitting the nail on here, this education piece. Remember home ec? and how good
Yeah,
they
right.
One of the best classes I ever had was home ec.
Yeah.
I learned how to cook. I learned how to do all this stuff. And so
Right.
you bring back home ec.
We're building more well-rounded people back then.
Really quick, if I could add just a little bit of context to that, we also have to be careful with our schools not to give schools everything, because we can't do everything well.
Right, that's true.
All these plates in the air, we're going to drop a few of those. So we've got to be careful about what goes where.
That's a whole nother reason. That's a whole nother panel, that conversation by itself. We're going to have to come back to that and park that. But since we're on the education discussion, and with all this conversation about funding the police, at the heart of everything we do is money. And as you all know, we are in a census year. Every 10 years, the federal government is required to take a census count of the people. And the vast majority of every dime that comes out of Washington is decided using data from the census that was taken 10 years ago for how we're allocating money. So one, I want to ask everybody, everybody on this panel, have you done your census form this year? All right, we 5 for 5 here, 5 for 5, because I did mine. And so for the people out there who haven't done it, I really want to encourage you to do it, because we can talk all this stuff about policing and resources and allocation, but if you don't do your part, then none of the rest of this system can work. And so you can go to 2020census.gov. That's 2020census.gov, and you can fill out the questionnaire. It takes you less than 10 minutes. It's 10 questions, very easy. You can also call 844-330-2020. That's 844-330-2020 to get your census form and get that done. The government has extended the date until October 31st. And so we really there's just no excuse for it. Let me just give you a quick statistic that I just got. It's fresh off the press about where Ohio is in our census data collection. Ohio has a rate so far of 66.1% return rate. We got a long ways to go, but here's the thing about that 66%. Franklin County's rate is 62% right now. But here's the thing. When you zero in on communities that are predominantly of color, like Linden, in Linden, for example, they've got a better rate. They've got 49% people have responded in the Linden area, and it happens to be one of the larger areas. But in the Mount Vernon area, it's 38%. And these are the places that need the resources the most. In German Village, it's 30%. In downtown, it's 41%. And so we need those of you who are watching, those of you who can reach out to other people to encourage them to get their census form in. As we close, I want to ask each of you with closing remarks, but for 1 minute closing remarks, but you got to say something about the value and importance of the census and turn that form in. So any volunteers to go first? Nick? Yeah. Jerry raises
Nick, go ahead.
Well, I'll just say this one. Thank you for the conversation. And you're correct. The census is so important. So in my day job as a project manager for neighborhood transformation strategies for the city of Columbus, we do neighborhood redevelopment. The census is not just about reallocation of funds. It also determines economic development choices, right? And so where private businesses decide to go, move their headquarters, hire, where private companies decide to do development. So it's not just the allocation of resources. It really determines so much more. So it's so important that you fill it out and make sure that you are counted and tell other folks to get counted as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Jerry.
Yeah, and I'm right quick. I'm a numbers guy, and I just know that when I was younger, we were like 11, 12% of the population. That was 100 years ago. And we still 12% of the population. So we need to make sure, as you guys are saying, that we count. Make sure that you do it. And if it's an issue of you don't want people to know where you are, people know where you are anyway. If you got a phone, they know where you are anyway. So let's give the numbers up so we can change those numbers around, because I know there's we had 5 in our family. Nationally was 2.5. I don't know how you have 2.5 kids, but we still 11, 12% of the population. I don't get it. Anyway, thank you. And I appreciate you having me on board, Kevin. Thank you very much.
I'm glad to have you.
Sorry, I said Kevin, Commissioner Boyce.
You can call me Your Honor. It's fine.
Your Honor. Okay.
That's what I go. Larry, and then I'm going to have Melvin bring it home. We got 2 minutes. Larry?
Yeah, I think different from the consensus, with all this excitement, with all this movement, let's do this census. Make sure you're doing that. Make sure you're registered and make sure you vote, whoever you vote for.
Nailed it. You nailed it there. Melvin?
Yeah, I'm going to almost echo that. What I was going to say basically is that your vote is your political voice. The census is your economic voice. And if you don't use it, then you have no opportunity to complain or advocate or what have you, because you haven't done your part. It's important that we all get out there and fulfill our civic responsibility in that respect. And our district partners with the census to make sure all our folks are getting that done. We've sent that out to our community. So crucial, it's important.
Well, I just want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy days to spend an hour with Central Ohio to talk about issues of race, wealth, and health for not just Black men, but for everybody. I think that all of your insight was meaningful. I appreciate the dialogue and the discussion and the contrast and perspective, especially because that's what I get as elected official. I hear from everybody, and this helps me as I make decisions and I do things that are important for Central Ohio. With that, we'll be back next week at this same time, same place. I hope you all enjoy us. See you around Central Ohio. Thanks for being on, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.